Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Risk with Dr. Naveen Agarwal. Each week, we talk about a topic related to risk management of medical devices in a very casual and informal way. This is not a webinar or lecture. Rather, our goal is to talk about key topics and challenges in a very informal way and share best practices. I'm your host, Naveen Agarwal, and I'm the principal and founder at Achieve, where my personal mission is to help you achieve success in risk management. Hi, everyone, and welcome to, once again, our weekly Let's Talk Risk conversation. So excited to see you here. I hope all of you are doing well. And guys, today we're going to talk about a topic which I'm sure is on your mind, which is artificial intelligence, machine learning, software as a medical device, cybersecurity. And we have a great guest today. That's David Giese, who launched his consulting practice about 13 years ago. And he has been helping small to mid-sized companies in this space not only develop these software-based products, but actually take them through the regulatory pipeline. So I'm sure he has seen a lot of interesting situations, a lot of interesting challenges, and he has maybe come across some unique solutions as well. So we'll talk a lot about that today. With that, David, I'm so excited to have you on the show today. Welcome.
Great. Thanks, Naveen. I'm excited to be here.
Great, David. So why don't we start by having you introduce yourself to our audience today a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. So I studied biomedical engineering at the University of Texas in Austin. And that's actually where I met my co-founder and partner, Dr. Ujjan Shrestha. And we, like you said, we started analytics 13 years ago. Actually, prior to that, Ujjan went to medical school. I went to graduate school, and then we kind of reconvened after. And we've, initially we really focused on the software development side, and then now we've been moving more and more into the FDA regulatory side starting about 5 years ago. But yeah, and I would say a large majority of our projects are AI related. So it's a fun space. I really enjoy helping all the clients we work with get their devices on the market. It's a lot of fun.
Wonderful. So David, we know the world of artificial intelligence, machine learning is just exploding with so much technology, and it's coming in the medical devices too, right? Based on my understanding, FDA has already cleared close to 1,000 AI ML based devices. So give us a 30,000 foot level view of this whole area. Where is it going and why so much interest in medical devices?
Sure. Yeah, that's right. It's almost 1,000 devices. And I think a large majority of that, probably more than 80%, is in the imaging in radiology space. And that's really where a lot of our projects have been. But I think, I think it's a lot of the common things a lot of people have heard, but there's a shortage of radiologists. There's a shortage of a lot of types of clinicians, and sure, AI has its issues, and you need to be careful with it. But I think there's certainly lots of opportunities. For those, I think sometimes people aren't aware of this, but of those 1,000 devices, none of them actually involve adaptive AI that's learning in real time. So I think that's something that maybe surprises people sometimes. The other thing is no generative AI devices have been cleared or approved either. So far, it's mostly been more kind of, I'd say, like predictive, kind of more traditional AI.
So kind of we are taking baby steps. We are taking baby steps. But you mentioned two key terms that I want to explore a little bit further so all of us understand. Can you tell us a little bit more about what's adaptive AI, what's generative AI, and what's the difference between the two?
Oh, sure. Absolutely. So there's this idea of having AI models that can learn kind of as they go from data. So let's say you have an AI model that's deployed at a hospital. It could actually learn and improve itself over time from that data. And that's used in other fields, but it has in FDA is I guess open to the idea of that, but has not cleared or approved any devices that are adaptive. And then the term predictive AI versus generative AI, that's probably not how I would describe it, but that's how in several FDA talks, the distinction they make. And generative AI is probably a lot of people are aware is more um, like ChatGPT, of course, is the in LLMs are a main example, but it's really AI that it's kind of self-supervised where you have these very large data sets and it's being trained on predicting the next value in these data sets. And a lot of it's text-based, but also there's large image models, large audio models as well.
So in simple terms, is generative kind of even smarter than adaptive?
I wouldn't. It's certainly more in many of the examples that we have. It's more general. Like I think that's the thing that surprised everyone is with ChatGPT is, hey, like we're doing a simple thing. We're giving it a blob of text and saying, hey, predict the next little bit of text, and then from that it can do so many different things. So in that sense, it's smarter, but I think it tends to be also there's new risks, I guess,
Got you.
with it doing things you wouldn't expect in a way that more traditional, what the FDA calls predictive AI,
Got you.
doesn't do in the same way. So
Okay. So David, let's talk about maybe from your vast experience, maybe one or two key challenges you have seen, especially in a small startup environment where people find challenging in the development phase or maybe in the regulatory submission phase. Anything that comes to your mind that you can share?
sure, yeah. So on the AI side specifically, it's we often have companies come to us and their data scientists are like, oh, our model is working so well, and they're very confident in the performance. But they don't realize that the data they're using to test their model isn't doesn't cover as many bases as they think. And once they do put together a study and they have predefined acceptance criteria as part of that study, they're disappointed that the model isn't working as well as they thought. So often, FDA will require you to have 3 different sites. That they need you to cover different subgroups. Ethnicity is a common type of subgroup that they concern themselves with, but certainly for different clinical applications, you'll have different axes you're thinking about. And so I'd say people being overly confident in the performance of their models is a common problem in the AI space.
Mm-hmm. And is it because they don't have as diverse a data set as they should have even in the training phase, or is there some other issue?
Absolutely. I think there's that. And I also think they don't have enough controls over their training process, and it's very easy for their team to overfit because they're using their test data sets too frequently. So,
So David, on that point, recently I think I came across a couple of posts from you on LinkedIn where you have started talking about synthetic data and FDA seemingly open to that. Can you say a little bit more about it, and in what way is it advantageous for us?
sure, yeah. So I honestly, you, John, would be able to talk a lot more about this topic. So, and I'll say as a disclaimer, I tend to focus a little more on cybersecurity, and he tends to focus more on AI.
No problem.
But so my comments here will be a little loose. But certainly synthetic data is data that you're generating either from like a physical model, so or from other sources. And the benefit is you can kind of create data for different subgroups more easily, and you can just generate a lot of data. Obviously, the downside is it's not real, and so if the process you're using to generate that synthetic data isn't accurate, then it's not going to work out so well.
So I guess the bottom line here is that it's a tool to be used, but don't over rely on it. That's a good way of looking at it, right? So David, let's switch gears a little bit, and I'm going to ask you, what are some of the challenges people face at the regulatory submission point? Like, what are some of the things that you have come across, and what best practices you can share with us?
Absolutely. So we're often working with startups, and their software engineers often do not have experience developing medical device software. As a result, they don't know about things like design controls, risk management, IC 623 or 4, and so on. And what will happen is they'll have a nearly finished product, and then they'll start thinking about the regulatory submission. And at that point, it can be really quite difficult to create all of the software and cybersecurity documentation you need for the submission because it wasn't done in the right order. Now, to be fair to the startups, there's so many guidance documents and standards. It's very easy, to say, hey, you should have a fully controlled process from the beginning. I don't think that's realistic in many cases, but there are often some very easy things you can do at the beginning that just save a lot of pain later on. And a few of those things are, setting up a good code review process, having in the software space, what you call like a CI/CD pipeline that kind of automatically runs tests and builds the software as you go. And then integrating things like cybersecurity scanning tools that will scan your source code and flag issues or flag dependencies that you have that are not secure. By integrating those things early on, by the time you get to the submission, there's a lot better chance you're not going to have large gaps and problems. I could keep talking on for a while about this, but
no, this is so fascinating, David. Thank you for sharing such specific insights. And guys, those of you who are just joining us today, we are talking with David Giese about challenges and opportunities in AI, ML, cybersecurity for medical devices. Keep thinking about this because I'm going to start inviting you all in just a moment so you can share your thoughts. And it doesn't have to be a question. Remember, this is not a webinar or a lecture. This is a conversation. So you can all be a participant in this conversation. So bring out your own insights, your own perspectives, what you have heard, what you're thinking about. All that is fair game. David, you mentioned cybersecurity, so I don't want to miss that. I know it's a very special topic. Tell us a little bit more about where people are struggling the most when it comes to cybersecurity.
Sure. So, yeah, that's an interesting question, where they're struggling the most, because there's a lot of places where people are struggling. Maybe to focus on one specific thing, I think if you're early in the process, if you're starting to develop a new software medical device, what I would suggest is go to the cybersecurity guidance and look at, I believe it's Appendix A, where they have a big list of cybersecurity controls they want you to consider building, and have your engineers really seriously go through that and think about, hey, which of these should we include in our device, and are early in the process. Because one of the most difficult things to do is we have companies come to us and they say, hey, we need help with our cybersecurity documentation, and then we go through this list of controls and we identify all these gaps. And now their software team needs to go and build things, possibly re-architect aspects of their software, and it can create big delays. A lot of the other things that you're doing for the cybersecurity don't tend to produce such large delays as missing controls. But yeah, if there's one thing I would say to do early in the process, that would be it. But gosh, people struggle in a lot of areas.
Yeah, it's a big field, obviously. So guys, I'm going to start inviting you to now participate in this conversation. Please don't hold back. Even if you're not working directly in AI, ML, cybersecurity, share what you are curious about, what you have heard that maybe is interesting to you or you are concerned about, and bring this on, and maybe we can have a great conversation on that. So, David, while we are waiting for people to join, I have one last question for you to set the stage. This is such a fascinating field and rapidly evolving. What would be your quick recommendation for our colleagues, risk practitioners? What kind of skills they should develop if they want to play in this area?
That's a very good question. I think trying to develop some technical understanding of how AI models are trained and some of the issues that they can run into, I would imagine would be pretty useful. And similarly on the security side, Google has a very good online cybersecurity class that's pretty high level, takes a little effort to get through, But I think if you work through that class, you'd be pretty familiar with the terminology, and I think that I would imagine that'd be a good level of understanding to pursue.
Wonderful. Thank you, David, for sharing that. Phil, you are next. Please unmute your mic and share what you have in mind.
Thank you, Navian. David, thank you for your time. I had a question about the standards that you brought up that FDA put out there. I kind of dug into that a little bit with our technology, and I reached out to other cybersecurity specialists that and asked what their thoughts were. And I guess my question for you is, do you feel that standard is sufficient, or do you feel it's kind of limited?
Just to clarify, which standard are you referring to?
The FDA standard that they put out for cybersecurity.
You mean guidance, Phil? I should talk about the FDA guidance.
Sorry.
Oh, I see. Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. Is it sufficient on its own? I mean, since we're working with startups, we focus on the U.S. market. That's typically as far as we go. There are other standards, ISO 81001-5-1, that it seems to be gaining consensus outside of the U.S., and it is a recognized standard by the FDA as well. I think if you were going to go beyond the guidance, that would probably be the next step to go to. The guidance itself, though, is a little bit more process focused. So I think from a process standard perspective, I think it's pretty good. And it's kind of just how far you take it and how deep do you go with your threat modeling and how thorough you are with the security controls you implement. So, I would say I think it's sufficient in most cases.
Thank you, David. Oscar, you are next. Please unmute your mic and share what you have in mind.
Yeah, it's fascinating conversation here. I just want to kind of expand on it's more of an expansion than it is a question, but I've been working in cybersecurity for medical device for a while, but more so on the network side. And what we're leveraging, or we have leveraged in the past, is really more so for device discovery, classification, looking anomaly detections. Really like risk assessment and analysis, and you're automating the incident response. You're using AI-driven tools to, automate the responses of the detected threats and just help streamline and really turbocharge the abilities to stay ahead of threats. I was wondering if you could expand on anything that you're doing, David, as far as cybersecurity from the network perspective, because that's what I've found that it can be very dangerous to a healthcare organization and to the devices themselves. Because, what one example is, you have an infusion pump that needs to go on the network, and a nurse, IT is closed, and the nurse will go ahead and throw that on the guest network. And all of a sudden you have something that's connected to a patient, diverting somebody laterally into the environment, take patient information, even get into the HVAC system, say to the hospital, and change the parameters. I mean, change negative airflow in an OR, and all of a sudden, or just crank up the heat in the hospital or in the lab. But at any rate, I just wanted to see if you could expand a little bit on the network side of medical device security, because it's one thing when you're actually securing the medical device internally. And another thing is once it's out there on the network, where it becomes, a danger to not only patient care, but also to patient information.
Fascinating point, Oscar. Thank you for sharing this. Certainly a lot of interesting nuances here. David, go ahead, please, if you have something to share.
Sure. Yeah. So I would say it's helpful to make the distinction between like the device security and then the IT security of the organizations. So one thing that often happens is I'll be talking with a potential client, and they'll say, and I'll ask, hey, how's your cybersecurity stance? And they'll say, well, we comply with ISO 27001 or SOC 2 Type 2, and the issue, and I'll say, well, that's great, and that's certainly a good thing, but that's different than the device specific security, which is what the FDA is focused on. And so I think what you're talking about tends to fall more in the IT security for the organizations. And I honestly would not say I'm especially well versed in that, although there's certainly some overlap in the concerns that you have. And I would say the FDA definitely wants you to consider the downstream effects that your device can have on other devices on the same network. So that's certainly something we consider.
So David, I do have a follow-up on this because this can very easily go out of hand and the scope creep and all that stuff. So would you advise people to reach out to the FDA very early on? And I know there's a Q-sub process. In your opinion, is that useful to understand the scope of your medical device and FDA's expectations around the use environment?
That's a great question. So we generally, when we're doing pre-subs, we're focused more on the AI validation and the clinical validation of the devices, more so than the cybersecurity. Because we found, at least for the types of devices we're doing, we've seen enough back and forth with the FDA to where we're pretty confident we know what they're going to ask about. Occasionally, there are, I'm trying to think of an example, unusual situations with high-risk devices or unusual deployment strategies where I'm like, this might be worth talking to the FDA earlier in a pre-sub, because if we get this wrong and they come back and want us to change this, it's going to be a lot of work on the product development side. So I would say if there's ambiguity around something like that, then a pre-sub would be worth it. But on the cybersecurity side, usually not, in my experience.
I think that's where experience comes in to make that judgment call. Thank you, David. Darpan, I see you have joined us, so please unmute your mic and share what you have in mind.
Hello. Hi, Naveen. Hi, David. Thanks for taking my call. So my question is more specific to software risk assessment, so-called software hazard analysis or cybersecurity risk assessment, when assigning the probability of software failures. In the past, we have some communication from the FDA on the software hazard analysis regarding assigning the probability of failure mode. And that is always to be assessed as a 5 or 1. So like if there is a software fails, if it fails or no, it doesn't fail. Not like a design failures that we have some kind of occurrence of ratings there. So what is your guidance on assigning the probability of failure while doing the software risk assessment documentation?
Excellent question, Darpan. David, I'm going to let you go first. And I also have some thoughts to share on that. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think, Naveen, you probably have a lot of thoughts on this topic because it's probably pretty common. So the way I always think about it is there's usually a sequence of events that occur within the software. And then before you get to the patient being harmed, there's additional events that occur more in the clinical environment around like how the clinician's interpreting information or the actions they're taking on it. And so I think it's very clear that the events that are occurring within the software and failure modes occurring with this in the software, you say the probability is 1. But I think for all the events that are occurring outside, like which often is encompassed in like the P2 probability, that will not usually be 1. And so, because if you don't account for that, you end up with it's not good, because then you're having to treat every software vulnerability at the highest level, which isn't practical and kind of misallocates resources. I don't know.
Yeah, I have nothing to add, David. You said it so eloquently. Thank you so much. Darpan, does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it does make sense. Thank you.
Now, I would say to this, there might be situations where you don't have enough understanding of the entire system, where you cannot project that sequence of events, when you cannot be sure about or reasonably sure about what might happen, what might not happen, and you want to take a conservative approach.
Got it.
There is nothing wrong in assuming a conservative approach. What you have to then step back and ask the question, am I doing everything I can to control the risk? And if the answer is yes, then is it still worthwhile? Which means, do the benefits outweigh the residual risk? So Darpan, excellent question. I know there's a problem in the industry, a lot of challenges, but I want you guys to know that you know your system better than anybody else, okay? So you ask the question, are we doing everything we can that is practicable? Okay, let me correct myself. Practicable. We leave it at that, guys. We still have 5 minutes, so I invite you to participate. As you can see, it's a very free-flowing conversation. It's not planned or structured. We want you to participate. We want you to bring up your questions, concerns, thoughts, and Particularly, I want to hear from you what you are curious about, because this is a fast evolving field. Okay, as we wait for more people to join, David, I do have a follow-up question for you. You brought up IEC 81001-5-1. Can you say a little bit more about that standard and how it relates to 62304?
Yeah, absolutely. So the way that I think about 81001-5-1 is it's kind of like it's a process standard like 62304, and it's really meant to integrate with 62304 and fill in some of the cybersecurity gaps that aren't covered in IEC 62304. So it involves security risk management, but it also involves other lifecycle processes like some of the tooling things that I mentioned earlier, like having tooling that scans your dependencies for vulnerabilities and having that set up, and so on. So yeah, so it's if your software development team is following 62304 in ISO 81001-5-1, you're probably pretty well covered. And I think it'll be interesting to see if there's an AI lifecycle standard that gets some consensus. I know there's several out there, but it doesn't seem like any of them the market's converging on. The FDA is definitely emphasizing AI lifecycle processes and some of the recent kind of publications and talks and stuff. So
good point bringing that up about the AI lifecycle management. I think there is something in the works because I believe Amy came out with a technical report that is now being considered for harmonization through the ISO process. We have talked about it in the past, and hopefully we can maybe address that in the future as well. But guys, as you can see, this is a fast-moving field, and we have to keep up with so much change, so much new knowledge coming at us. And that is exactly why I really encourage you to get engaged, get involved in one way or another. Our Let's Talk Risk Forum provides a great opportunity for you to be a part of this community. So I know we are running close to our end time here. So David, I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to just process your thoughts and share some key takeaway points with us as a result of this conversation today. But for the rest of you guys, I want to share a few announcements. The first is news that I want to share with you that I have recently launched a brand new series on my Let's Talk Risk newsletter on Substack. This is a reader-supported publication that I spend a lot of energy and time on, so your support is greatly appreciated. But I feel like there's a need in our community to learn a little bit more about risk analysis techniques. We all know that FMEA is not sufficient. But well, what else is out there? TR 24971 tells us a few more techniques, but is there anything else out there in other industries that we can learn from? So my goal in this series, which is going to last for at least 1 year, I believe, is to address some of these techniques that are being used in other disciplines and translate them in the context of medical devices. So if you're interested in boosting up your knowledge of risk analysis for medical devices, I encourage you to take a look at this series that's just launched and be a part of that. I had given you a link to my Substack publication in a comment on this event page. Take a look at that and sign up today. If you have any questions, reach out to me and I'll be very happy to guide you, point you to the right direction. Finally, guys, those of you who may not be new to this, know that we do this conversation every week on Friday at 11 Eastern. So if you're interested, mark it on your calendar. Next week, I'm going to have a very interesting conversation. In fact, Alex, I see you in the audience. I will have a conversation with Alex about how we can use risk analysis to be more robust and rigorous in outlining our design requirements. I know this is a pain point, and Alex is an engineer. He will have very interesting practical perspective to share with us. So don't miss that. Show up next week. The announcement has already gone out. So with that, I know we have run out of time. So David, please share some key takeaway points with us.
Absolutely. So if your software development team is new to medical device, the medical device space, certainly try to get some of the processes set up from the beginning so that when you get to that first submission, there's not as much pain. Second thing I'd say, look through the cybersecurity controls appendix and the FDA guidance. I think that's, again, will save you a lot of pain. And the third thing we didn't really talk about on the call, but I would just stress, if you're working with regulatory consultants who don't have software experience, I certainly think if you're working on SaMD, working with regulatory consultants who have software experience is important, because there's a lot of unique strategic nuance to software and SaMD and AI. So
Excellent.
those would be my 3 points. Yeah.
Thank you, David, for being so generous in sharing your insight with us today. I think we learned a lot. Thank you, Darpan, Phil, and Oscar, for being a part of this conversation. And thanks to all of you guys. You show up week after week, and it gives me so much energy. How are you guys feeling? Use the emoji icons to share with me some feedback, your impressions, your reactions to our conversation today. Let me know what's how you feel about these types of discussions. And you can always reach out to me directly on LinkedIn. Send me a message. I want to hear from you. What kind of topics would be of interest to you, and anything that you want to suggest. And by the way, it takes no preparation to come to this session as a speaker. So if you're interested, send me a message and I will book you for a future conversation. I know all of you have interesting things to share with us. With that, guys, have a good weekend ahead, and we will meet once again next week. Take care. Bye-bye.